Hi, it's Dennis Daly. During one of my drives across the U.S., I spent half a day and a night in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Why? Well, it just seemed like a good place to stop. And I had found that it was full of history and still had an operating trolley line, which to this day it does. I asked my tour guide, why did they pick Fort Smith as a location to originally settle it?
The Arkansas River probably was the main reason that this site was chosen for a military fort. The problem being you had voluntary removal of the Cherokee Indians from North Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee. They were brought out here and settled in actually Arkansas. The Osage Indians who lived in this area had signed a treaty with the government and ceded some of their hunting grounds for Cherokee settlement. Once the Cherokees showed up out here, the Osage kind of went back on their bargain. So you have a problem out here between the Osage and the Cherokee that the U.S. Army was sent out here to solve. And the river being on the edge of the Cherokee Osage territory, this was about as far up by eventually by steamboat that you could get. So it was an important location due to the river.
I think we forget how important rivers were. I mean, they were the highways of the era. I'm from southern Indiana. Evansville's not that far from where I grew up. There's still barge traffic there, but there are great museums that show that at one time these riverboats, the steamboats, were everywhere, and I'm thinking in my mind the musical Showboat. The entertainment came up by river.
Yeah, really everything. Their whole life was based on the river. Their entertainment, their pay, their food, their supplies, their equipment and tools. You mentioned the interstates of back then. That's exactly what the rivers were, because there were no roads. Traveling overland was almost impossible in this part of the country because it was. You didn't know what was over the next hill and how thick the undergrowth would be.
I'm having trouble in my mind trying to figure out how to describe this enormous building that is across the street. It's almost a block long by most small town standards, 2 stories. Half of it has these wonderful, huge window arrays that are 2 stories tall. It would have had to have been built by the military. I mean, it has that West Point kind of look about it.
That's the focal point of our site here. And what you're looking at there is at the far right end of that, where the porch is, that's the original enlisted men's barracks that was here with the 2nd Fort Smith. That building dates to the late 1830s, early 1840s. The tall window section down to the left here towards the south end of the property, that's the 2nd jail addition to the building. That building was a soldier's barracks, and then eventually Judge Parker's court, and the basement there underneath the porch was used as a jail. They decided that conditions were so bad in there that they appropriated money in 1886 to build a 2nd jail wing addition to the building. So that's what you see coming out this direction. Actually, 2 buildings in one there.
This is such a formidable building. Was it in disrepair? Has it been fixed up? I mean, it's in gorgeous shape. Tell us a little bit about the evolution of it, because so many things really had to be brought back from the dead historically.
After Judge Parker died in 1896.
Well, let me back up. We need to tell everyone who Judge Parker was.
Okay. I qualify that. Judge Parker came to Fort Smith in 1874, and you had a vast amount of violence in Indian Territory before Oklahoma became a state. And Judge Parker was appointed by Ulysses Grant to come here and basically bring the Indian Territory into line. You had a lot of people going out there and seeking opportunities and crime and things. So there was, that was the situation. Parker was here 21 years, processed in excess of 14,000 cases, sent 79 men to the gallows.
So he was another one of those hanging judges.
He was the hanging judge in that respect. At the same time, he was a family man, a very well respected man in the local community. So, he's viewed differently by people today. Some people stick that hanging judge and that cruel label on him, and then there are other ways to look at him as well.
Well, I notice over here this is Parker Avenue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's named after the judge, and he's buried here in the National Cemetery. There's a hospital in town that he served on the board that founded that hospital, so it's still around today. So he's had a lasting impact on the community.
So now the evolution of the building over the years.
Okay, after it was used as an enlisted barracks up until 1871, the Army moved out at that time. Most of your Army situations and problems were a little bit further west out on the plains. So the Army leaves here and turns it over immediately to the judicial system and the court system. And they needed a place to hold court. The court building had burned, so this was a logical place. It was already government property. They used the basement, like I said before, as a jail. And then in 1886, they decided to build a second jail wing addition to the building. A senator's daughter, which is a neat story, from Massachusetts, who was a writer, came down through here, toured Fort Smith, and saw the conditions of the first jail, which was basically a dungeon. It was a collective cell. They put everybody in one big room, and she commented on that, and then talked to her father, who was a senator from the state of Massachusetts, and got him to go to work as far as legislating improvements on the jail here at Fort Smith. So they added that in 1888. That was a little bit different situation. Rather than one big cell where you kept the prisoners all together, you could divide them up by a fence. They had individual cells, a little bit better bathroom facilities and things like that. We always like to tell people, though, in the first jail, where you had one collective room, nobody ever successfully escaped. What do you think happened in the new jail?
I'm sure you had some escapees.
They got out of there quite a bit. They really did. The new jail was state of the art in terms of design. It had a very advanced ventilation system, heating and cooling system for its time. But those ventilation shafts invited prisoners to find ways out. So.
Well, you look at a huge brick building, brick and stone as this one is, and I can remember seeing the buildings all those years I lived in Washington, D.C. I remember looking at one of the government printing offices one time, this 7 or 8 story building with little bitty windows, and I'm thinking, this didn't used to be air conditioned. And this was in an era where men wore starched collars and women wore 14 layers of clothes, and there was no right guard. So we're talking about really difficult to think what the lifestyle had to be like in those days.
Yeah, it was extremely tough, and wool clothing is another thing that comes with that. And you start putting wool on in July and August in Arkansas, and it's pretty tough. But the first jail had its problems in ventilation, and they talk about even in the summertime throwing buckets of water on the stone floor in there to cool the prisoners off. And it would steam, So conditions are pretty harsh, especially out here with the humidity.
Tom, what was the role of this building, or at least the area here, during the Civil War?
During the Civil War, Fort Smith was occupied by both sides. It was a military post at the time Fort Sumter was fired on, fearing. There were only 2 companies of cavalry here at that time, so fearing a southern state and a situation that they couldn't control, the Army evacuated the post. The state of Arkansas took it over, and then a month later, Arkansas joined the Confederacy, and the Confederates held it until 1863. With the Battle of Honey Springs, which was the largest battle in Indian Territory, state of Oklahoma, about 60 miles west of here, that paved the way for Union reoccupation. And in September of 1863, the federal troops came back, took Fort Smith, had a small rearguard action to the south of town near Greenwood, and basically occupied it for the rest of the war. The high point, though, of the Civil War in Fort Smith came in the summer of 1864, as Stan Wadey, who was the only Indian general during the Civil War for the Confederacy, he personally led an attack against Fort Smith, and there was a fortification line built around the outskirts of town by the Federal Army, and when they attacked the south end of town, drove in pickets, shelled the garrison, and made a bid to take Fort Smith back. They didn't quite do that, but they created a lot of problems here, drove a lot of refugees into the city limits, and placed a lot of pressure on the Union resources here in Fort Smith.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned that I am only slowly learning as I learn more about U.S. history is the fact that there were so many Native Americans in this area, and we're just almost on the border of Oklahoma, which has the highest percentage of Native Americans in its population.
Mm-hmm. And that's really, we are one of the few Park Service sites and historic sites in the country that really deal specifically with those issues, Native Americans, removal, and that part of our history. So it's a very important part of our story all the way through, from the founding of the first fort all the way through Judge Parker's time and the problems that were out there before Oklahoma became a state.
Now, what happened to the building in the era after the Civil War, across the turn of the century? Did it fall into ruins? Was it used by the city?
No,
what happened then?
It's really been used nonstop throughout its history, and what we're doing right now is trying to take it back to 1896, which would be the end of Parker's time. But it was used by the local community. It was a boys' club at one time. It was also a welfare building. It was used as a hospital, and we've had visitors come in that were actually born in that building and said, "Yeah, I was born in here just like a hospital at one time." So it's had a lot of different uses over the years, and the Park Service has had it since 1961. We've got a picture of John F. Kennedy coming and receiving the deed for the property. He landed in a helicopter on the lawn here and received that. So that's a neat story too.
Well, let's do a little walking here as we talk. I don't know whether they can hear it at home. What kind of bird is that? Do you know?
I'm not sure.
You've got some wonderful wildlife around here.
I can't peg that one for you, to be honest. I wish my superintendent was here. He's our bird watcher.
Now, what has been here in Fort Smith the continuing legacy of this city? It's on the Arkansas River, navigable at least up to this point. I see in this district here along the river what looks like a bunch of buildings that were warehouses, a lot of transfer of goods going through here.
Yeah, Fort Smith's role in history really is part of Western expansion, and Fort Smith being on the river, being at the point where it was at one time about as far as you could get west by boat, it's been an important transportation and communication area for this part of the country.
Well, I can see that. I can just picture the steamboats, the paddle wheelers coming up here. If this is all the farther west that they could get on the river, then they're going to offload everything here, and then it'll be wagons from here on west.
Right, and I wanted to add a little bit of interest for this day, or actually tomorrow. Tomorrow's the anniversary of the first gold rush expedition that left Fort Smith and went west. The Randolph-Marcy expedition, which had military escort. These were the first gold rush people in 1849. So we're going to celebrate that tomorrow.
Well, now something just went past here, and let's walk over toward the tracks. I don't know many towns in America. I'm thinking of Galveston, New Orleans, which still have the old-fashioned trolley with the overhead electrical wire. Mm-hmm. And we're not talking about a sophisticated system like San Francisco, but the old-fashioned ones. Has this been running forever here?
Well, not exactly forever, but they were running these, at the turn of the century and into the 1940s, and then they phased them out. And then a local group of very interested people in the community have restored a couple of trolleys and put them back on tracks and restored the wires. It's been a neat process to see how it's all been done. They actually went into South Arkansas to a small town that was using one of these trolleys as a hamburger stand, and they went back in, lifted it up, and brought it back to Fort Smith, and then they've either had to find and salvage yards the parts or make them themselves. So it's been a neat process.
Now, will he be turning around down here? I want to get some of the sound after a while. Maybe ride it for a few feet, talk to him. How long a loop is this? It's not a loop. It's a...
He'll move right up there to the edge of Garrison Avenue right now, and then he's going to come back by here. He'll probably pick up some more passengers, and then he'll make a run about 4 blocks back here to his museum area, where he'll stop and do a talk there. Eventually, in the downtown improvements that we have going on here in the community, they're going to run that trolley track to make a left turn there at Garrison, and eventually run it over to a city park that's over here at the foot of the bridge. So he'll add another 4 or 5 blocks onto his route.
Oh, that'll be neat. What kind of comments do you get, particularly from students, when they see this? Because this is so much a part of another era.
They are fascinated with it, and it is really a drawing point for students and to get them to understand, transportation and how it's changed over the years. Today we all jump in our cars and go somewhere that we need to go, but back then, you didn't have individual transportation, so public transit was important. And Fort Smith, at the time these trolleys were used, it was an industrial city, so there was a need to move people around inside the town, conveniently and quickly.
I don't want to digress too far, but I'm going to walk over by the tracks here. This whole area between the 2 rails and on the sides is brick, and that is something that I don't want to make too big a deal about this, but my hometown, many of the streets were brick. You go to cities and you can see they were originally brick before the real coming of cement and the use of asphalt. Brick was the way everything was paved, but I can't picture how many people it must have taken to lay a brick street. I mean, we're talking about something that's pretty labor intensive.
Yeah, and at one time this whole downtown area were brick streets. So you're exactly right.
And slick when it rains.
Very dangerous.
Tom, what is going to be the future of all of this? Even though we're amidst some very old warehouse buildings, it looks as if some of these have new life in them.
We have a lot of things going on in the downtown area. Right next door to us here is the Fort Smith Museum of History. It's a locally owned and operated, supported museum. They really tell the stories that we don't get to over at the National Historic Site. We have about 80 years of history that we concentrate on, and they tell the whole story of Fort Smith. So they have a lot of neat exhibits in there. But the city has passed some sales taxes and things to generate funds for improvement in the downtown area. We are renovating our civic center here in town. There are plans for a river walk and a lot of development in the downtown area. So we're excited about Fort Smith and what's going to be going on here in the next 10 years.
Well, I hear you have a bus, but it's also in a trolley motif.
Yeah, that's a public transit bus that runs through the historic district of town, and you can get on that and ride around about a 30-minute loop, and they'll take you through the old area of Homes, which is a restored residential area. They'll take you down to Miss Laura's, which is the Bordello House, which is a very interesting place, and then through the historic district over to the National Cemetery and even by some of the older churches in town also.
One of the things that impressed me as we were driving down here, there was a big sign. Not that I wouldn't think you'd have a symphony orchestra out here, but this is kind of out in the prairie. You're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Fort Smith Symphony this year.
Yes, we have an excellent symphony here in town, and one that they travel around. They're very sought after. John Jetter is the conductor, and he does an excellent job with the local symphony. And if you get a chance to see them, actually they're going to be performing tonight. I hope you get a chance to check them out.
Tom, let me, as we're waiting for the trolley to come back here, let you get on a soapbox, if you will, and talk about something. The whole thing of historic preservation, so many towns, large and small, let everything go to ruin, and then it's too late. What would you say to people out there, regardless of the size of their city, as far as seeking out the history and making sure that everything isn't destroyed? Start
now is the thing. It's crucial to get involved in your areas where preservation is important. We've lost very important buildings here, very important houses, and it's a matter of getting involved, getting with your local historians and people that are interested in that, and there's a lot of support. There are grants and there are ways to improve. Money's always an issue, and people want to know how we're going to do this without money. But there's money available if you pursue the right sources.
Well, now I need to ask a logistics question. Can we flag him down here and ride a minute, or would that take us too far down?
I'm sure we could probably work that out.
This is going to be fun. Listen, which side do we want to be on? We don't want to be in the middle. I know that.
We need to get across the tracks.
Now we're standing on a siding, and I hope he doesn't come down. Now look at that. He's got the old conductor's outfit on and the bow tie, and boy, all I need now is a straw hat and some ice cream. All right, yeah, let's get on here. Well, let's see. Do we pull the steps down? Which side?
He's the other door for us there.
All righty. Oh, here we go. Circumnavigate this.
Can we make a loop with you?
Yes, sir.
Hello there. Hi, I'm Dennis. How are you, sir?
All right.
Nice to meet you. Hi. Hi there. Let's go ahead back to the back here. Hi. Now, this has a conductor stand at each end of it. We're in essentially the back now, but quick reflexes there.
Yeah, with the conductor stands at both ends, you would run out to one end of the line and then actually pick up his steering mechanism there and bring it back here, and then make the other route at the other end of the line rather than turn the whole car around.
Yeah, I guess in many situations like this one, you don't have a loop at the end, and unlike San Francisco where they have that turntable, you can turn the cable cars around, you just have to throw it in reverse.
Right, they just pick up their equipment there, bring it back here, lock it down, and keep moving.
This is so neat. The whole inside of this is wood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, practically the whole thing, with the exception of the undercarriage and a little bit of framework here, is all wood.
I wish I could show people what we're doing. We're going down between two buildings, and there's another stop here. We're going beside somebody's garden here. Oh, and over here, can you describe, this is a house that's half a trolley?
Right, and that's a trolley car they're eventually going to restore. And it was built into a little house there and a shed, a sun porch, and they're eventually going to take it apart and restore that trolley car itself.
You mentioned about, I don't want to speak too loudly, he's doing a little dissertation up here in the front, but the way so many of these old cars were turned into diners in big cities.
They were, and one of their cars here was a hamburger stand. I mentioned that before.
Now, who is this fellow who's our conductor today?
I'm not sure what his name is. We can maybe ask him here in just a second.
He looks as if he's out of Central Casting. He really fits the part.
Yeah, they wear the uniform and the hat and everything. These guys all are volunteers. They donate their time, and they care about the story of the trolleys. And an interesting part of Fort Smith's history. Here we go again.
You may have told me, but when was this restored? How long has this line been running?
They've been running this over about the last 10 years. It's something that's happened fairly recently, and it's taken a lot of work.
What is the worst the weather gets here in the winter? I'm just wondering, today it's a beautiful spring day, the windows are open, the air is blowing in. I just wonder what it would be like to ride this when it's miserable.
We'll have temperatures in the 20s and 30s most of the winter time, on and off, but it won't last very long. It'll come in and we'll have a cold front, and then in a few days we'll be back up in the 40s and 50s. So you get a cold snap and then you get a warmer snap after that. But we will get a little snow here once in a while, but not really much to speak of.
Well, now here we're going into an area that has got tracks all over. We're going to go over a crossover here in a second where two rails intersect. That should be kind of noisy. And we have a lot of old railroad cars here.
Yeah, this is the Trolley Museum right here. And the shed that you see over there to your left is where they park the trolley at night. That's also their work area where they restore these and get this up to par. If you look over here to the left, there's a coal car and then a steam engine. And that steam engine actually ran from Fort Smith to St. Louis, in the 1920s and 30s. It used to be a local fixture of importance at the fairgrounds, and the fairgrounds donated it here to the Trolley Museum. So it's a neat thing.
You look at a steam engine like this, and the first thing that comes to mind is, my Lord, how much does that thing weigh?
Yeah, I don't know the exact weight of it, but
and that's just a small one compared to the ones they use out in the Rockies.
They moved it across town from the fairgrounds, and it was a lengthy process.
Yeah, we're really going through some of the really neat parts of town. We're right beside a cemetery here.
Yeah, this is the Fort Smith National Cemetery, and I mentioned that Judge Parker is buried in there, but you have a large number of veterans from many different wars. Some of the first Fort soldiers are even buried here in the National Cemetery.
Boy, it goes on forever. It looks like a mini version of Arlington.
Yeah, and the neat thing about it is it's an active national cemetery. Many of the national cemeteries in the country have been closed due to space and constraints along those lines. The local community got behind an effort in the last couple of years to expand the cemetery. They acquired property and then gave it to the Veterans Administration to expand the cemetery here and keep it going.
Now, we're at the end of the line, it looks as if, so he's going to have to come down here and turn things around.
That's right. We'll probably have to trade places with him here.
Oh, it's such a well, here we go. Let's see. He's going to go around there.
The seats also flip. The backs flip around, and you'll see the people come around, and they can really just lean their seat backwards and stay in their seat that they're in.
Let me talk to a few of these. We've got a group of students here. Hi, how old are you all? What year in school?
6th and 6th. 4th.
5th, 4th, 6th. I'm out of school. You can probably tell that. You having fun today? What do you think of this?
It's really neat, and I like it.
It's too bad that we don't have things like this anymore. Everybody gets in their car and drives now. I like all the noise it makes.
Me too. It's neat.
What school do you go to?
Marion Intermediate.
Hey, can you do that together again? That was good.
Marion Intermediate.
Okay. Well, sit down. We're going to get going here. Have fun. Thanks. All right. Now, here he is. Where is he? Hi, Tom.
He's picking up his steering equipment there, and he's going to trade places.
All right. Let's move around and... Didn't get your name, sir. You're one of the volunteers here. I'm Dennis. You are...
Tom Porter.
Tom, what's it like to go back in history here? You really look the part.
I love it. I also rode in St. Louis on the trolleys before they abandoned them there.
Ah, so you have a little bit of history in it.
Yes, my father also was a motorman.
Oh,
in
well,
St. Louis
wow.
when he was a teenager.
I see. Okay. This would have dated from about what? What era?
This one here is 1926. It went into service in Fort Smith. It was sold to a man in Ashdown, Arkansas. He used it as a diner, called it Streetcar Cafe, for a number of years. And then he sold it to a man in Louisiana. He was going to restore it. It failed. So Dr. Martin read about it. He went down, purchased it, brought it to Fort Smith, and restored it.
Oh, well, great. Well, let me let you get on the track here. We've even got the mechanism here that you dump your coins in. If I had some coins, I'd dump them in there. Let's see. He's attaching handles. That's to keep somebody like me on if you had duplicate sets, you might have somebody hijacking this.
This is a key, and you can't operate it without it. And you have to hold this down all the time to build up the air in the compressor. And if you let it go while you're traveling, it's a dead man's throttle, and it'll stop the trolley.
So if you, God forbid, got sick or something happened or fell down, this thing wouldn't run off on its own, it would stop.
That's right. If you have a heart attack, something will...
Well, I didn't want to mention that. All right, let's get going here. Do you have a bell, a whistle?
Oh, I'm sorry.
This really starts with a jerk.
Yeah, it does. It's not as smooth as can be. The track we're running on is abandoned Frisco tracks, which they would switch their industries along here, and they gave them to the trolley.
Well, I was wondering, this area where you have all your old railroad cars parked, the museum area, is just a cobweb of railroad tracks, so it was a mini yard at one time.
Right. It was Midland Valley terminal. They purchased it from the Midland Valley and used it.
Well, now over here on the left, we've got a faded blue switch engine, and does that USAF mean U.S. Air Force on it?
Yes, it is.
I didn't know the Air Force had trains.
Well, they use this probably out at their camp or something like that.
Oh, okay. Now we're going over the crossover again. Here we go. If you've ever had a model railroad set, you know, particularly if it's a figure 8, you have to have a crossover where one track, and you better make sure you don't have two trains in the same place. Here we're going around this. That's like fingernails on a blackboard. All right, now we're straightened back up, and we're going down through this. That's a nice mural. Somebody, Tom, has painted the history of the railroad here.
Right, they've got the history of the trolleys, and that were used in Fort Smith, and you can see down here at the far end, the first ones were actually mule drawn, and then that brings you all the way up through to the electric trolleys, and the one like we're in today that dates, like you said, to the 1920s.
Is this a Brill trolley? I hear that word used. Was that a model or a company that made them, I wonder? I've just heard the word Brill. I think it must have been one of the manufacturers of them. Technically, if I'm not mistaken, the word trolley means the overhead thing that touches the electricity.
Right, 570 volts of DC current.
Stay off the roof.
Yes.
Does that ever come off up there?
Yes, it does. It kink in the wire, something like that, it'll come off.
And how do you get it back on? You'd have to...
It has a rope here that you pull it up and down.
Oh, okay. Don't have to climb up there and tinker with the electricity.
The first cars that we had here had a running board all along the side, and you could enter from the side of it. Mm-hmm. And of course they advanced into the one that was enclosed, but you notice all the motormen were standing out into the elements as they operate them.
Well, you get a wonderful, I don't know whether to call it a breeze or a draft when you start out.
Yes, it's sort of a jerk on here. It's not the smooth, you know, but...
Alrighty, here we go.
I thought it was real good back in the time.
There we go. Yes, it is better to be sitting than standing here. Tom, I need to wrap things up here. I guess Fort Smith is pretty representative of a lot of cities where until you spend a night there and start walking around and go through the old downtown, that's another problem. Everything's out on the interstate now. You never see the downtown section. You really don't know what the heritage was.
Right, and but the neat thing about it is if you can take a left turn or a right turn on Rogers Avenue, depending on how you get in on the interstate, and just come into the downtown area, you'll see that we do have a very rich history here. It's a frontier city. It's a city that has a very important place in the national picture, and a neat place to visit, and it's a neat place to live. I've been here all my life, and I don't really want to go anywhere else.
Well, and if the weather, here we are early spring, is indicative of what it is usually, it's not bad here either that way.
Yeah, the fall and the spring here are both very nice. We have a pretty mild winter, and in the summertime the humidity and the heat can get you, but you know, it's really not too bad, and you know you've got some relief on the way with the fall.
Tom, one final thing. This area here, are you open all year round? What are the hours? How can people listening to this, maybe planning a trip through this area, find out more about it? But first, before that, I need to say thank you, sir, very much. We're going to get off here.
My pleasure.
You do good work.
Thank you.
And hold it steady while I get down the steps. Thanks, kids. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All righty, 1 step 2. Here we go. And we're down, back on the brick sidewalk. All right, same question. How can people, let's say you're listening to this in Yazoo City, Mississippi, hey, Fort Smith might not be a bad place to go to. How can you find more about all of this?
We have a website here in town. The Convention and Visitors Bureau has a website, so we're on the internet. You can call the National Historic Site here, and we would be glad to give you information. We're open 7 days a week, with the exception of Christmas and New Year's. So there's always somebody here at the National Historic Site.
You also have Miss Laura's, which is the old bordello, to put it mildly. I can't remember, was it Carolyn there?
Carolyn Joyce.
We were going to interview her, but she broke her leg.
Yeah, she's had a little trouble, and she actually portrays Miss Laura, who operated that bordello house, and that's a neat part of our history as well.
Well, Tom, maybe we can come back by here sometime, and we'll wave at the guy. There they go. Fort Smith goes off into history. Tom, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
What a noisy machine, but what a great reminder of the past. I'm Dennis Daly.